All right, we are with the life of Paul. We're in Acts chapter 19, continuing on. In our last lesson, we discussed actually a little event that occurred that had nothing to do with Paul directly. Paul was not part of it. That happened to be concerning the seven sons of Sceva, itinerant exorcists. They are Jews. Seven sons. They try to exorcise or cast out a particular demon, and to discover. And here's the thing: how it relates to Paul. It doesn't relate to him directly, but indirectly, because they mention that actually what they say is, "We exorcise you by the Jesus whom Paul preaches," as though that were going to be enough. As though that were, as we said then, it was some kind of incantation of, oh no, what power you have by just mentioning Jesus and mentioning Paul. That's hardly enough. That's not enough whatsoever. And the demon says, and his answer, or what he says, actually is frightening, but also gives a little bit of insight. He says, Jesus, I know. Paul, I know, but that's a different word. Paul, Jesus, the original Greek word is, I know who that is. Yeah, I have a full acquaintance with him. Paul, I know, but that's a different word of, yeah, I know the name. Okay, yeah, I've heard of him. But then the demon says, but who are you? And he's about to show them who they are, because he's going to pound them to a pulp, and they're going to be lucky to make it out of there alive. They are very lucky that all they were bruised up in, and it reminds me of that term in the book of Judges with Samuel of hip and thigh, that he defeated them hip and thigh. And now they weren't killed as Samson killed the Philistines. They weren't killed, but they're not going. I imagine they learned their lesson. They're not going to do that again, because you're playing with forces and powers you are powerless over. You have to have the help of God, of which they weren't wanting the help of God, other than just loosely saying the name. Were they obedient to Christ? No, not at all. And if they had been actually given that power, as Paul had been given that power, if they had been members of Christ's church, if they had been members of Christ's church and had been given that power by the Holy Spirit, they could have done it. Of course, that's a different category altogether. And the demon couldn't have done anything. He would have been cast out, because then they would have had that power. Now, we're coming to verse 21. So, just before we get to verse 21, we see the effect that this news has of what happened to the seven sons of Sceva, and there's a great fear that occurs in the area because verse 17, this became known both to all Jews and Greeks dwelling in Ephesus, and fear fell on them all, and the name of the Lord Jesus was magnified. So there's an effect that this has, though it had nothing to do with Paul, once again, directly. What happens here is that the Lord Jesus was magnified. All right, and how would that be? Because they would have known these men are pretenders. Seven sons of Sceva, they're not followers of Christ. They're just pretenders. That's all they are. That Paul is able to do it, and they may be able to cite some others that they knew were able to do it, but these men could not. Now, we mentioned also last time that of what occurred in Ephesus of those that believed, and they there were those that practiced magic, and they took out their books on magic, and they burned them. All right, and the price, it totaled 50,000 pieces of silver. That's a significant bit of cash right there. That's some wealth. And and we explained that instead of selling it, they burned it. Why? Because they wanted that darkness, they wanted that ignorance to stop. They didn't want to support that. They could have sold this, presumably, for 50,000 pieces of silver. Somebody could have gotten, their money out of this, but they're not going to support that. That this needs to stop. This time of ignorance needs to stop. And how's it going to stop? Not by spreading it. So we've got to stop it. And so it's their personal property. They can burn it if they want. They can keep it if they want. They burn it. All right, they're not going to be a part of this anymore. Now, as we see in this, because somebody's going to come to this conclusion, someone else is going to come to this conclusion. When you have the truth being presented, that is Christ and the doctrine of Christ and the truth that He brings concerning truth of all things, truth of reality, you come to a conclusion that, these things concerning magic, like those exorcists, seven sons of Sceva, all right, it didn't work. It didn't work at all. And they very well know the difference between a real miracle, and it's by God, and the fakery that goes on from those saying they can perform magic. And someone like the seven sons of Sceva, that it was something that they tried. It obviously didn't work. They didn't have the power of God behind them. And so the logical conclusion in this is that the teaching of Christ takes away this ignorance, this superstition, this darkness, this age of being underneath the weight of paganism. It is lifting all that. It's lifting all that. And there are others who are making note, and they're not happy about it at all. Now we go to verse 21. Verse 21. When these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. Now we discussed this, matter of fact, a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, Sunday morning, discussing the book of Romans. That the book of Romans had to have been written after this point, between this point, Acts chapter 19, 21, until we get to Acts chapter 21, verse 17, when he had entered into Jerusalem. The book of Romans had to have been written between these 2 points, because he mentions in the book of Romans wanting that he's on his way to Jerusalem, and then afterwards he's going to Rome. But he's not in Jerusalem yet. So it had to, the book of Rome had to have been written after this verse. All right, and the fact that he purposed in the Spirit that he's going to do that. All right, now I firmly believe that we can purpose, have an idea of something we want to do, and though we might want to do it at the time, it's not something that we really purpose. We didn't put a priority on it. And in time, we don't see it as that big a deal, okay? Or it's, and we don't do it. But there are things that when we purpose in the Spirit, this is what we're going to do. Regardless of the cost, regardless of anything else, this is what we're going to do. And he purposed that he is going to Jerusalem, and after that, he is going to Rome. And as we made mention in our book on Romans, it's not the way he thought he was going to Rome. He is going to go to Rome, but it's not in the manner that he thought, that he may have imagined for himself. Now, we want to make mention now that in Ephesus, he is not alone. He's not alone in Ephesus. One, he's been there for a couple of years. He's been there over 2 years now. Okay. And the church has been established. Also, there are others that come and go. But we see, so he sent into Macedonia 2 of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus. But he himself stayed in Asia for a time. So he sends Timothy and Erastus there. Now, in Philippians chapter 1, he does mention, Philippians chapter 2. I'm sorry. In Philippians chapter 2, let me get there myself. Beginning in verse 19. But I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly. Okay, so he is here in the book of Philippians, he's saying he's sending Timothy to him. Now, Philippi is in Macedonia. So is Thessalonica and Berea. Those are 3 places that we know that Paul went, that they are in Macedonia. Now, here's the thing, and you're going to ask, why did you bring up Philippians chapter 2, verse 19? Well, I'm bringing it up to show that he's done this more than once. Because here in Acts chapter 19, he's not speaking in Philippians chapter 2, he's not speaking of something that he does here in Acts chapter 19, because the book of Philippians is written considerably later than Acts chapter 19. How do I know that? That's a prison epistle. He speaks of his chains in Christ. And in Acts chapter 19, he's not a prisoner yet. He will be, but he's not a prisoner yet. He's very much a free man. In the book of Philippians, you see he's not a free man. All right, so the book of Philippians is a later, something later in his life, but we see where he is of we can call it a habit or his mode of operations, of where he sends individuals to different places when he feels like they need to be sent there, or those places need somebody solid like a Timothy. Timothy, we know very well. Erasmus, we don't know as much. And but something that needs to be said is Timothy, I'm not sure how old Timothy was when he began to help Paul and Silas in chapter 16. I don't know how old he was. He was a young man. And when we get to places like 2 Timothy, first 2 Timothy actually, which is late in Paul's life, he still tells Timothy, let no one despise your youth, which means Timothy is still considered a young man at that time. Okay, now, when he sends Timothy to Macedonia and Erastus, Timothy is, he's reliable. Even as a young man, he's reliable. He knows that Timothy will do what he needs to do, what needs to happen. Now, Erastus, who is Erastus? Erastus is mentioned in other places. Erastus, in Romans chapter 16 and verse 23, we see where the New King James calls him the treasurer of the city. Some translations may call him, the Old King James calls him a chamberlain. Others may call him a steward of the city. But he is a city official, is what he is. And evidently there are times when he can just do things like this of go to Macedonia when necessary. And so Erastus is going to Macedonia as well. And some would say that Erastus may not have been with Paul at the time, but that Paul is sending a letter to Erastus for him to go to Philippi, or Macedonia, Macedonia. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where Erastus happens to be at this point. It's that Paul says he's sending the 2 of them to Macedonia. but he himself stayed in Asia for a time. Now, we come to verse 23. Verse 23, it starts with these words, and about that time. Okay? Very similar to the words in verse 21, when these things were accomplished. Then coming to verse 23, and about that time. It's not specific. It's we're not given anything precise, but as someone might say, concise. That we don't need all the details of how many weeks or how many months or how many days it happened to be, but about that time. It makes it concise, keeping things in chronological order. About that time, this is what happened next. Okay, verse 23. About that time, there arose a great commotion about the way. So, here is something that occurred in Ephesus. And these words, great commotion. And as we're going to see, it is going to be a great commotion. And we've already talked about volatile cultures. Because there are some cultures that can be riled up quicker than others. Anybody can be riled up. And I think you could get anybody eventually into any peoples, I should say, not just any individual, but large group of peoples, into a mob setting of where they are a mob. And Satan, I have to say, I have no scripture in my mind to prove it, but Satan would love a mob because nobody controls a mob. A mob just does what it's going to do. And as long as the fires are fanned, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And there is going to be, we saw in places like Lystra, where they can go from it at one moment wanting to worship Paul and Barnabas, to the next thing of they are in the process of killing Paul. Okay, that's a big leap. And that's what I mean by a volatile culture, going from one extreme to another extreme, going from just basically everything at peace to all of a sudden there's this great commotion that is there. And it's going to be a commotion that, like with a mob, they don't even know what the commotion's about. Most who are going to be involved in this haven't the foggiest idea what it's about. They are hearing one thing and they're hearing another thing. This one is extremely passionate about what they're saying. This one also is extremely passionate about what they're saying, but the issues are different. It's like, no one really, something bad is happening and no one really knows what it's about. But they're going to shout, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians" anyway.
Would that be like when those people stormed the Capitol?
Well, that is a good question. Any mob is a bad thing to be involved in. We're just going to say that, okay? That you don't want to be part of any mob, because mobs have no principle. Mobs have no moral setting of where we're going this far but no further. A mob won't do that. A mob, something happens inside a mob when it gets violent, and somehow it just takes over. I can't explain it. I cannot explain it. But people can die in a mob, and the mob doesn't care. The mob just continues on. And until it is stopped, however that may be done, it can just escalate and escalate and escalate until everybody's tired or something comes in and puts a lid on it. But you don't want to be part of any kind of mob. Yes, and just to get a little closer to answering your question on that, is it's easier, from a personal standpoint, to break the law when everybody around you is breaking the law? Okay, it's easier. And somehow everyone becomes bolder because there's a lot of us and we're in power for this moment and we're going to do what we want to do at this moment. Now, we're going to find out where this began, because you've got this great commotion, and once again we have this term called the way. And this is what outsiders referred to the church as. They didn't call it the church. They didn't call them Christians necessarily, but outsiders and enemies would call it the way. That's commonly what it was called. We see that going back quite a number of chapters, chapter 9, we can see that. They referred to it as the way. And we see in Antioch where they were first called Christians at Antioch. So followers of Christ were calling themselves Christians. And the church, obviously, we see that all the way through. But this concerns that of the way, and as they saw this. So there's a great commotion about the way. Now we come to the man who starts this. For a certain man named Demetrius, we get his name, a silversmith, who made silver shrines to Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. Now already we're getting the motive behind this. And actually, he's going to show in his speech, because we're going to go over his speech, he's going to go over his speech what really is important here. But it starts with him. There's this Demetrius. He's a silversmith. He makes silver shrines of Diana. And here is this no small profit that's brought to the craftsmen. Now understand, there would be silversmiths who would be involved in this. And this would be more, because it says silver shrines. That's not silver figurines. I've seen figurines of Diana, all right? But this is more than that. That's one thing. But these are silver shrines to Diana. And there would be multiple craftsmen who would be involved in that, not just silversmiths, as we're going to see in a moment. Not just silversmiths who were involved in this in Ephesus. And this brought about a great profit. Other craftsmen could be woodworkers, workers in potters, those that make candles. I'm just bringing things out that are possibilities, that there was an enormous profit that was made because you have pilgrims, and we will just call them tourists as well, that would go to Ephesus. And of course the pilgrims going to the temple of Diana might very well not only buy a figure of Diana, but also buy a shrine. And it'd have to be something that's small. It can't be huge. I wouldn't think. Certainly not someone who's going to be traveling. But this is made no small profit to the craftsmen. This was their one egg in one basket. That's what it was. Now, with a silversmith, or actually any craftsman, you don't have to have just one thing that you do. A silversmith can make all kinds of things. That is not limited to just Diana. It's an enormous amount of things, and jewelry to practical items that just you're making them out of silver. But all right, so here's the motive that's underlying all this. He called them together. All right, who's the them? This would be the silversmiths, and also to the craftsmen. This would be craftsmen who are occupied in this same sort of trade. These craftsmen that aren't just necessarily just silversmiths. There could be other craftsmen that are also involved. But he called them together with the workers of similar occupation. So this would be others that are making their money the same way. But it says workers of similar occupation. The text doesn't call them craftsmen per se. This could be those who have businesses, that they are selling the images, they're selling the shrines. This could be those that are transporting them. It could be others they're all surrounding this, in effect, by this very profitable business in Ephesus concerning the worship of Diana and the adoration of Diana. So it's, getting the silversmiths together in Ephesus, while that might be a sizable group, I don't know how much that is, but with these others, now you got a much larger group. All right, because it says with the others, you have these, with the workers of similar occupation, and said. All right, now here is the beginning of Demetrius's speech. Okay. Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. There is the motive. There's the motive. And as I would say, it is the important things first. He says nothing about how glorious Diana is, that we must worship Diana. He says nothing to show the importance of Diana, except that we gain from this. This is our livelihood, but this is our prosperity. It's not just a livelihood. These guys are making quite a living off of this. Now, we come to his first point here. And this is showing the effectiveness that Paul and the gospel he preaches. Actually, I need to switch those. This is the importance of the gospel, where the gospel heads, and Paul is the primary one, the most visible one at least, that is spreading the gospel in Asia. And it's the gospel that's having an effect. It's already had an effect on those who burned their books of witchcraft. Now it's having an effect on others. And they're seeing it in their trade. They're seeing it in that they're not selling so much anymore. All right? Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. Okay, so here is his first point in this. His point, and he's about to give the conclusion to his first point. His first point is concluded in verse 27. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling in disrepute. All right, that's the first point. That's the first thing he's bringing up, is that he starts off saying we have our prosperity by this trade, and now this trade is going to fall in disrepute. All right? Now, as I said, first thing, or important things first. Important things first. That's the important thing. That's the big motive here. I don't think they cared one bit, really, about Diana. She could be replaced tomorrow as long as they could continue their trade in it. It could be, for all they care, I am convinced of it, it could have been a god from Babylon. Okay, so what? We just switch and now we're selling images and shrines to this god from Babylon. All right, it doesn't matter. It's the prosperity of it. That's what's falling into disrepute, because what they're seeing, and it is true, they're coming to the conclusion that Paul's saying they are not gods that are made with hands. You know what they just admitted? Diana is made with hands. Meaning, Diana is man-made. Diana is not real. Diana is a fraud. Diana is not so great. That's what they are admitting in that. Instead of defending the greatness of Diana, instead of doing that, they are more concerned about their own prosperity than anything defending Diana. Now, they're about to be saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. But notice, and we'll get to that, they're not saying great is Diana. It's Diana of the Ephesians. That this is the pride and the glory of Ephesus. Nothing to do with Diana. This concerns hometown and what Ephesus is known for worldwide. Or so they believe it to be, and I imagine it was well known.
Wait,
Yes.
are these Gentiles?
Yes. No, these are Gentiles. Yeah. These are Gentile pagans. Now, I assume that they are. It doesn't tell us otherwise. It doesn't tell us otherwise. But is it possible that you could have Jewish craftsmen who are involved in creating shrines of a pagan god? Sure. I can show you Aaron doing it. Back to the book of Exodus. I can show you Aaron doing it.
I thought the Jews at this time had put away all those idol worship.
Yeah, but if I can't underestimate. I'm not about to underestimate someone's willingness to compromise for the sake of profit. I'm not going to underestimate somebody's willingness, but I don't think that they are. I don't think that Demetrius is Jewish. I don't think that he is. And we're going to see a rejection of Ephesus in the theater of a Jewish man who's trying to say something and he never gets to say it. When they perceive he's Jewish, he has nothing to do with Diana. Get him out of here. All right? This has to do with the Ephesians. He's not an Ephesian. He may have been born here. He's not an Ephesian because he doesn't worship Diana as Diana the Ephesian. But, okay, so verse 27, beginning of that again. Not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also, here is point number 2. The temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. This is his second point, which shows that he throws this in. The first point was really the motive. The first point was really the main point. Now this one is added to it. All right, that her magnificence destroyed, Asia and the world worship. Okay, so this is like his tag on to all of this. This is his tag on. But when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." All right, this has more to do with their prophet and getting pilgrims and others to Ephesus and the pride and glory of Ephesus than it really has to do with Diana. Diana is the means by which these other things have been done. These other things have been possible. They can have a good prophet, and Ephesus is a place of pilgrimage. Evidently it was. That people would go there from around the Roman world because of that temple of Diana that's there. They evidently were very wealthy people. And now they see the problem of, if people believe the way, if people believe what Paul is telling them, they're not going to be coming around anymore. All right, and one might ask the question, why don't we just let Diana solve this problem? Just let her solve the problem. Or she's bound to have great friends at Olympus or wherever she happens to live. She's got to have some really influential friends out there beyond our sight. Let them handle this. They can do it, but no, that's not even up for discussion. They've got to do something. And now, going back to verse 8 again, when they heard this, they were, here we are, full of wrath immediately, because they suddenly realized where this has been going. Some of them may have already realized it, that with the gospel coming in, that there was something that was about it that was showing people the truth, and the truth didn't lead to Diana. So they're full of wrath. They cry out saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." And I think the Ephesians part is really the important part. Why not just say, "Great is Diana"? That's my question. Why not just say that? They can't. Because it is Ephesus. Ephesus is the actual emphasis here. Ephesus, and of course their prosperity. Now, verse 29. So the whole city was filled with confusion. Or what's going on? All of a sudden, it's just a normal day, a regular day, and all of a sudden, there's this shouting. There's an uproar. And there's the uproar just kind of escalates, and there's this confusion across the city. And rushed into the theater with one accord. Now, the theater, there is an outdoor theater in Ephesus. It's still there to this day. I've never been to Ephesus, but I've seen plenty of photos, and I've known those that have gone to Ephesus. The theater is still there. It's outdoor. It's built on a hillside, and I don't know how many people. It's rather steep, by the way, and I don't know how many people could actually be there. But that was like a gathering point for the city for such things like this. That this seems to be some sort of outrage, so they're going to the theater presumably to find out what it's about. Okay? And this would show that there's a basic organization to the city, and that there's a basic protocol that everyone seems to know, or at least a tradition everyone seems to know, that something like this is going on. So they rush to the theater, and it would be to find out exactly what's happening here, and we're all joining together, whatever it is. We're going to join together in it. Okay, so they go to the theater, because that, no doubt, that's the best place in town for everybody to get together and make whatever uproar they think they need to make. All right, so you have verse 29. So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord. That's where they were going. Had no idea, most people had no idea what it's about, but that's where they're going. Having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. So, not only has Timothy and Erastus been with Paul, so too now are Gaius and Aristarchus. So they've been taken. Now they're Macedonians. They're not necessarily Jews from Macedonia. They're Macedonians. And so they've been seized in this. They can't If they could find Paul, they would have drug him out somewhere. But they can't find Paul. Okay. And also, there are others in the city, members of the church being one, but not the only ones. There are others in the city that are very concerned as to what this is, what's going on. And like with the church is wanting to conceal Paul because they're out for blood. I mean, these people are out for blood. Now, verse 30, and when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. All right? He's not going. You're not going. Because the locals know what other locals are capable of doing. They've seen it. They know the history. They know the history. I'll give you a for instance. Not exactly similar to this, but it was Jimmy and myself. Years ago, we were in Manila, and we were being driven around by the preacher there in one of the churches in Manila. And he was our host. That congregation was our host, and he was driving around. And as an aside, never go to Manila and drive. All right, you're not ready for it. You will likely die. Okay, you're just not ready for that because you're not accustomed to that. Someone who was raised in that environment not only knows the traffic, but they also know something else. We are heading down this street, and he sees blocks. This is the driver, the preacher. He sees blocks ahead of us. What Jimmy and I don't see or don't recognize as being much of anything. He sees people. And he sees them on the street. They're at a distance. I can't tell what that's about, but he says, we're going to avoid that. And he knew something we didn't know. If by chance Jimmy or I had been driving, which would have been a very bad idea before all this, we would have just gone right into it. I don't know what it was, but he saw it as being a dangerous situation. We're not going there. Because it was, I have to say, from what I could see, a crowd. What were they doing? Don't know. I don't think he necessarily knew, but he didn't want to get involved in it. And so we quickly turn. All right, so here you have these disciples. They're Ephesians. And they tell Paul, no, you're not. And I could see that if he were to insist, that someone would just wrap their arms around him and say, you're not moving. If you think you're going there, you're not. I'd rather you tussle with me than you die in there. Now, I'm not saying that he did, that was done, but I could see that someone having that kind of protection for him of where, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere close to that place. You don't even need to be seen. Now, verse 31, here are others. Then some of the officials of Asia who were his friends. That's not saying they were members of the church. They were his friends. Could Paul, being an apostle of Christ, have friends that are not members of the church? Of course he can. Those that doesn't mean you break off friendship simply because they won't obey the gospel. Is you hope that they will and you remain friends with them. Here you have these officials of Asia. They were his friends sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater. So here are these others. Here's non-members of the church. They are officials. They send a message to him pleading, don't you go near that theater. Don't you go there. It's not going to go well. Now, we'll just do this next verse, and then we'll need to call it a day in our class. So, verse 32, some therefore, so here we are at the theater, some therefore cried one thing, and some another. And these, like we were saying, these are impassioned cries. They are extremely angry or whatever, but they don't match. They don't match. Someone's yelling one thing, okay, that's something to be angry about. Someone's yelling something completely different, okay, well, I guess that's something to be angry about, but why aren't these people angry at the same thing? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. For the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Most had no idea. Something's happening, and they have no idea, but they're joining in. They're joining in. And what's about to happen is kind of funny, because they're going to be there for about 2 hours shouting, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Okay, congratulations. I don't know why you would do that, but they found it. You know, it's like you have insulted everything one could do to the Ephesians, and we're going to show our loyalty, yes, to Diana, but also to Ephesus. And you can't come in here and start changing the minds of the Ephesians or anybody else, because our prosperity is involved in this. Our great city may fall into disrepute if the temple of Diana falls into disrepute. Why would people come here? You know, that would be their question. Okay, so we will continue next week, hopefully. Thank everybody for being with us. And I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you.